When you are the lowly E1, E2, E3, you think you have zero power, but you do, and that is how this commanding officer is going down in flames and is officially fired. And this is one of the few times that I feel like we need to highlight it, because we also don't hear the political BS, lack of trust and confidence, and we actually have detailed information from people on the ground that have said exactly why this commanding officer is fired. They say Captain Danielle DeFant was removed from command of the guided missile cruiser USS Lake Erie on October 12th due to what Navy said at the time was a quotations loss of confidence in her ability to command. She was fired after Navy investigation found DeFant cultivates a toxic work environment on the ship through a number of actions, some of which an investigator found amounted to bullying and battery under Navy regulations and military law. And this is the one time I will say that the Uniform Code of Military Justice is actually being used into some degree, and some people will say it should be actually exercised further. I'm not a JAG officer. I will not say this is legal jargon or whatever. If you are, please write down below what you think about the story, because I think it is interesting in the legal aspect. But somebody who's actually able to account legal facts in this case to say, this is illegal. Now, what we're doing about it, I hope doesn't stop here, but let's read on. They say the investigation says DeFant routinely berated officers in front of other members of the crew and, in other instances, inappropriately touched and struck subordinate officers on the bridge of the ship during operations. Witnesses describe a captain that was quick to anger and who they hear yelling so loud it could be heard down passageways and from behind closed doors. The crew told the Navy's investigator that they felt they had to, quotations, walk on eggshells around their captain. In one incident described in the report, the Lake Erie was conducting a moor to buoy operation off the San Diego coast. On the bridge, DeFant asked out loud, quotations, "Do I have safe bearing?" And the ship's conning officer responded that she did. But DeFant was apparently speaking to another officer, the officer of the deck, not the conning officer who responded. Witnesses on the bridge said she then walked over to the conning officer, grabbed him by his arm or shirt collar, and pulled him close to berate him and says, in quotations, "Was I talking to you?" Witness recalled DeFant asking the officer. She then said, quotations, "I was talking to the OOD officer of the deck. Don't ever interrupt me again," or words to that effect, the report says. This is not like the late 80s or, some other time period where this stuff is just going to be contained and no one's ever going to hear about it. There are so many levels of things that are going through this, and that's why this report is coming out. But I will say, if you are seeing that somebody is laying hands on somebody in a manner like this, there are so many other channels that you could go through, that the fact it came out through a survey, an annual one at that, was a little bit too late. And I would say, if you're a member of this, please feel empowered. You have inspector generals that you can reach out to and people that could be witnesses to what you're talking about and bring justice forward a little bit better. And some people say that's not enough. Inspector generals are not the best, but I mean, you have them, congressmen, a lot of other people. I mean, knock on doors until you get some kind of response. I think just sitting there being quiet is not the best way to go about it. And if anything, more accountability can be held, as people have shown. Maybe they did nothing about it, which could show negligence as well. The incident left the officer, quotations, nearly in tears. One witness said, according to the investigative report, the contact amounted to criminal battery under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The officer was the target of much of defense ire, the investigation says. Another time while the Lake Erie was at sea, the officer pointed out some dolphins from the bridge. DeFant approached him and yelling at him to refocus his attention, the report says. Another officer, a female, also found herself constantly in the captain's crosshairs, according to the report. The investigation found DeFant excessively reprimanded the officer and once brought her to tears. Despite the repeated reprimands, the investigation says the captain never issued formal counseling to the officer and never put reprimands in writing. And this is something that everybody should look at, whether you are the E4 brand new person that is now managing people for the first time ever, or people that you're E7 or some other rank going up, is you have to get this stuff in writing. If you're not getting it in writing to show that you've done appropriate counseling, to show that there's deficiencies, jumping to hitting somebody, laying your hands, berating on people is not the way to go. And that is something that is hard because a lot of people want to stay informal with how they treat juniors or subordinates to their power and their command. But that is something that a lot of people have had to learn because they'll get burned like this if there was any shown documentation. But the officer investigating the allegations wrote in their opinion the reprimands were belittling and humiliating. Defense treatment of these two officers amounted to bullying as defined by Navy regulations, the investigating officer wrote in the report. In other incidents described in the report, defense struck officers with her open hand or the back of her hand to get their attention. During one such incident while the Lake Erie was coming into San Diego Bay, defense allegedly smacked a female officer on her collarbone and told her to pay attention when she struggled to hear another crew member on the loud bridge. In another incident on the bridge involving the same female officer, defense allegedly pushed her aside rather aggressively, the investigation says, and says the bulk of the crew complaints about their captain described in the report relate to her habit of screaming at her subordinates, mostly other officers, but sometimes also the chief petty officers who comprise the senior enlisted crew members on board. From what I'm seeing from this report, it looks like during some evolutions that could actually lead to high stress environments where people in these situations, if they're not able to focus and they're so scared of this commanding officer coming after them, every bit of fear all the time, walking on eggshells, they're not going to perform their job to the utmost ability. You have to give some level of remediation, some level of training, some level of other stuff to make them feel confident that they can do this job. If you're just going to lay this literal smackdown on everybody, you're going to end up with the whole crew that just can't even perform their jobs because they're operating out of fear, not out of confidence. And that is a very fine line that I think was crossed even before this. We'll get to that. The pattern of abusive language detailed in the investigation began not long after she assumed command of the Lake Erie in July of 2022. In a memo endorsing the investigation, the commander of Carrier Strike Group 9, the one-star admiral serving as defense operational commander, added more details about defense time as captain. A command climate survey was conducted on the Lake Erie from September to November of 2022, just months after Defant took command the previous July. A quarter of the crew responded. The survey contained 70 negative comments about the commanding officer, mostly about her being quick to anger and yelling. Defant received just 9 positive comments. To look at this, there were 25% of all the people that ever responded to this, which means probably a lot of people were scared to respond at all, which you're like, there should be way more crew that are responding to this to give feedback as well. If you're that person that never responds, this is the time to show you. If you have a command DOC survey that happens periodically, you need to get your butt on the computer, start filling out every gripe and moan that you have, because that is one chance you have. But 25% of that crew, where 30 are officers, 300 are enlisted, and 70 of these were talking badly about her. Like, that must have meant every single one of the 25% was bad. And I would only have to assume that the rest of the crew was just so scared to say anything that they just didn't say anything at all and just were quiet. Those are the people that we need to be worried about that don't feel that they can speak up. They continue to say, but Defant didn't tell her strike group commander about those negative responses when she debriefed him on the results of that survey in January 2023, the memo says. Instead, Defant wrote in a letter that the ship's overall climate was, quotations, healthy due to leadership that was transformational and supportive. Through a Navy spokesperson, Defant declined to comment. If you think 25% of all the people responding is healthy at all, that's bad. If you think that people are sitting there giving you mostly bad comments with only 9 out of 330 people possibly around that in your crew not being good, you're probably the problem. This is one of those you got to look around real quick. It's probably you. What I find crazy about this entire thing is the history of this commanding officer should be remarkable, should be commendable, should be somebody that has compassion or understanding for sailors, but apparently maybe never learned from their history, and I'll tell you why. The report says Defant enlisted in the Navy in 1992 and received her commission in 1999. During her more than 30 years in the Navy, she served as a chief engineer on the guided missile cruiser and destroyer and as a defense fellow in the office of Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island. Do you see this right here? Prior enlisted, somebody that has had multiple roles that should be commendable, that probably would understand junior enlisted and junior officer problems as well. That's what I'm shocked about with this, but a lot of people are not shocked about this, but they are shocked that nothing was done sooner. Sethy Poo on Reddit says, nice to see the part on there where she just lied about the results of the command climate survey. The higher-ups read these. There should have been a punishment as soon as she lied about the results of the survey, considering that the strike group should have had the actual surveys and knew she was lying. An investigation shouldn't have to happen for them to acknowledge she lied about the survey. I do agree with this because these DOC surveys go above the commanding officer, and they are aware that if they happen, they get reports on them. There are focus groups where they bring people together to give subjective data to talk about it. Also, you have anonymous posts that are put up on there as well, where you can write whatever you want to write about all the programs and things like that. There's a ton of ways that these things are being input to make the command better. WB Travy writes, only hope this sends a clear message to those other ships out there that the triads need to be mindful of those that help get them to where they are and who will help them get to where they want to be. Unfortunately, this is not the first nor the last. All we can do is help those that have the courage to step up and say something. Maybe, just maybe, if we clean up this behavior, and some may say in, as it appears, by what I am being told and what I see in the Navy is more in need of us than we are of the Navy. Leaders do better. XR171 writes in rebuttal to this and says, it sends a very clear message. The worst that will happen is you get relieved. The worst that will happen is you get relieved, assign a cushy desk job, and retire with full benefits. I think where a lot of this friction happens at that is like a junior enlisted or a junior officer could be kicked out for whatever reason, and that could happen very quickly, and they don't really have as much to lose as a 30-year career commanding officer. I do understand that there is time in service, and we will agree here. I'm not just saying it's okay. But what I don't want to commend here is the fact that we had so many bystanders in this entire thing that did absolutely nothing. Like, how many people served with this officer that were command master chiefs or were the executive officer or engineering officer? People with some power that obviously have navigated with various commands that have weight that they may not have it on their collars, but they have it in their bearing, integrity, character, competence, where I'm just like, this was not the first time. This wasn't. And I bet you there's people that are out there right now, they're like, oh, finally. This CO is finally now getting canned after they should have been done at maybe their 20-something year mark. I mostly wanted to cover this video, like I said in the beginning, because I wanted to show accountability. We have details, reports are out, and people are actually talking up about some of this. And if anything, it should tell people to do these damn surveys to make sure that they actually get heard, to tell command master chiefs, chiefs in general, report this shit as you see it. And if you're an officer that's junior, you don't have to go through this just because it's a bad time and that's what you're supposed to do. As always, the conversation continues with you guys down in the comments below. What do you guys think about this situation? How many toxic commanding officers, executive officers, senior enlisted did you have, and what was your experience with that? Because I think we're learning from each other on a faster rate than we've ever seen before. As always, if you guys like what I cover about this topic or various other topics, hit me over on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, or down in the comments below. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.